Hey everyone, and thank you for joining the first of our remote working resources web series. This one's focused completely on telecommunications and phone systems. My name is Craig Stonaha. I am the president of Laughing Rock Technology. Here on the call with me is Tyler McCulley, our business development manager, and Maurice Weaver, our telecommunications manager. Just a real quick background here on the webinar series and what our goal is. First and foremost, we want to make it very clear that the primary goal here is education. We're not here to sell you anything. We're not trying to push any products or anything at all. What we really want to do is kind of run through the current state of the industry, current state of what's happening out in the world, and focus on work from home options for business. So different things that you can use to streamline operations, become more efficient in a decentralized environment. Obviously, the next tab says, current global conditions. I think we all know what the current global conditions are right now, and hopefully you've all ordered your toilet paper. So we do realize that this has been a very fast evolution. Over the course of 45 days, we've all been forced to change how we do work on a daily basis. But luckily, the industry, the IT industry, the telecommunications industry has been moving towards a work from home in a decentralized cloud environment for the last decade. So the tools are there as long as you know what questions to ask to make sure that you get the right things in place for your type of environment. So why are we having the webinar series? What makes us experts? Personally, I have over 2 decades of experience in telecommunications and voice over IP. Our staff has countless decades combined. We've done deployments for Cisco systems, major international organizations, overseas organizations, nonprofits, municipalities, SMBs, you name it, we've probably touched on it. And currently we have deployments all over the United States as well as international, and we are one of the largest voice over IP providers in Eastern Pennsylvania. So we've been around the block a few times, and hopefully we can share some of that experience with you guys. So let's jump into this thing. We do have a pretty succinct agenda here. We don't want to keep you too long. We know everybody's busy. So we're going to hit 3 main topics: cloud versus on-premise phone systems. We want to talk about the difference, pros and cons, kind of weigh them, and give you some analysis on what you can and can't do in each environment. Number 2, what do we need in a phone system? So this is going to give you specific questions that you want to ask when you're talking to vendors or when you're talking to partners, to make sure that you're getting a telecommunications environment that encompasses all of the current technologies. It is such a broad field out there right now that it is very easy to get lost in all the techno jargon and everything else. So we want to just kind of break it down into what every phone system should have so that you can check some check boxes to make sure you make an educated decision. And the final thing we're going to hit here is we are going to touch on Microsoft Teams. Now, we have an entire separate webinar series. One of these is going to be focused exclusively on Microsoft Office 365. And in there, we're going to hit Teams exclusively. But today, or extensively, I'm sorry. But today, we're going to hit Teams from a telecommunications standpoint. So we're going to touch on the phone system integration portion, the collaboration portion, and how you can leverage that from a business environment. Finally, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to post them in the meeting chat. Tyler and Maurice are going to be throwing them together, and we'll make sure to address everybody's questions at the end. And if you have anything that's specific to your environment that can't be answered in this format, we'll absolutely reach out and answer whatever you need on the side. So let's jump right into it. Cloud versus on-prem, the classic battle. So first, let's make sure we're all working from the same standpoint here. Just understand what a cloud system is. All we're talking about when we say a cloud phone system is any phone system where you can't walk into a room and touch your phone system. If you can't unplug it, kick it, punch it, tickle it, whatever, if you can't do that, then you want to make sure then you're probably on the cloud. And there's a ton of different variants of this, a lot of different ways for a cloud system to be configured, but that's really the delineation factor right there. The second, or next, is on-premise systems. Basically, it's the opposite. If you can find it in your building and you can touch it and your phone system lives somewhere within physical reach of you, you own your own phone system. You have an on-premise system. Now, realistically, until about 5 years ago, hosted phone systems weren't even really a thing. They were around and you could get them, but they were expensive. They were not always the best quality. They had kind of a bad reputation. In the last half a decade, the age of the on-premise phone system has ended, and the entire industry has flipped on its head. So in the last 5 years, cloud systems are pretty much the norm. On-premise systems are dying a fast and fiery death, and we're trying to help customers and partners to navigate those waters. Um, just to give you full disclosure here up front, we do not typically recommend on-premise systems at all anymore as the industry has moved away from them. But that said, this part of the webinar is designed towards companies that currently have an on-premise system and are trying to figure out if they can leverage it to do what they want or if they should be looking at making a change. Finally, the last item here is how do they stack up? So we're going to go through a couple of different slides here, just kind of hitting individual components of how these things stack up with each other. So the first of these is going to be, in my opinion, the most important, and that is how do they handle outages? So this is one of the driving factors that has pushed the industry away from on-premise phones. So on-premise phones have a natural issue, which is they live in one place, which we like to call in our industry a single point of failure. That one location, whether it be your office building, your house, your apartment, wherever you have your phone system, if that location were to have an event, a fire, flood, power outage, internet outage, whatever it may be, not only does the phone system go down and calls can no longer be received, but all of the phones directly connected to it will go down with it, and any remote devices will also go down. So effectively crippling the entire environment. Now, hopefully in this type of scenario, you have failover, which would happen at a carrier level. And in that situation, the calls would be directed somewhere else, maybe a cell phone or something like that. But you do want to check and make sure you have that with your carrier. And you do want to be aware that this type of failure is a native issue with on-premise systems. A hosted phone system doesn't have that problem, but there are other questions that you need to ask. So a hosted phone system, if your building were to go down, the phones in that building would no longer be accessible, but any remote devices would work just fine. So your customers would be able to call your main numbers, your auto attendants would answer, your voicemails would pick up, everything would work fine. Remote phones at people's homes or in satellite offices would work fine. And digital phones living on apps or living on desktop computers or whatever would all work fine. The only thing you would lose, functional wise, would be the physical phones in the office that's affected by an outage. That said, this is where we want to talk to whoever your vendor is about infrastructure. So a cloud system does have a point of failure in their infrastructure. So if it is a small so for example, let me give you an example real quick. All of our phone systems that are hosted on our platform are built out on a dedicated resources that are in the Google infrastructure. So we picked Google because they have the largest fiber deployment in the country, multiple redundant fiber rings all over the continental United States. Plus, they have the most data centers for redundancy out of any major data center provider. They just have tons and tons of infrastructure. In the 2.5 years since we built our own backbone, we've never had an outage. Knock on whatever my desk is made out of. That said, Google has. In fact, about a year ago, Google lost an entire data center that was tied to our infrastructure. Nobody even noticed. The failover was virtually instant. Even active calls for our customers didn't go down. They didn't even blip. So that's what I mean by infrastructure. Most large hosted phone providers are going to have a strong infrastructure, either one they've built themselves or one that's built on somebody else's strong infrastructure. For example, like a Ring Central or something like that is going to have multiple data centers. They're going to have multiple redundant layers to protect call integrity and to protect your system. We have seen small hosted phone providers that do not. And we've actually seen small hosted providers that don't even have data centers. They have servers that are built homegrown in closets where they're selling services. So asking about infrastructure is one of the first things you should be doing when talking about hosted phones. Otherwise, you lose a lot of this outage protection. Another thing while we're talking about outages is you want to have a conversation with vendors about guaranteed uptime. Now, this is a bit of a trap. Guaranteed uptime doesn't mean what it looks like on the surface it means. Most providers are going to, and most legitimate providers are going to offer you some sort of guaranteed uptime. And in our case, we offer a 99.9% guaranteed uptime. Here's the trap. Those are annual guarantees. And 99.9% over 365 days comes out to roughly 8 to 9 hours of downtime. That's considered perfectly acceptable, which means that you can be down for a full business day and you'd be told you're fine, or you could be down 8 or 9 times over the course of a year for an hour at a shot during business hours, and that would be perfectly acceptable. So guaranteed uptime is a little bit of a mixed bag. I wouldn't rely on it, and I wouldn't count on a guaranteed uptime really being a value added feature within a phone system. What I would say is that most major providers that do have confidence in their abilities are going to offer a guarantee. So if they're not offering a guarantee, that means that they're not even thinking that far ahead yet. They're just keeping their stuff up. They don't have an SLA in place for dealing with outages and for everything else. So you want to ask the question just to make sure that they have that as an offer. Also, you want to talk to them about how do they limit future outages. So it is a big move right now within the industry. Self-correcting systems, AI integration, things like that. It's worth having a conversation about how do they deal with the potential for future outages, and how do they deal with security breaches and things like that. These are all things that you want to talk about with your vendors prior to making a decision on which direction you want to go in. The next section that we want to discuss is support. Obviously, support is huge. In a perfect world, you'd never need support, but I think we all know that this world is not perfect. So support is out there and with purpose. We bring up support specifically because as part of a dying portion of the telecom industry, support for on-premise systems is becoming extremely difficult to get. We've seen multiple providers completely exit the market in the last 12 to 18 months. In fact, I mean, some of you may even know this, Toshiba literally boarded up their entire telecom department about a year ago. One of the largest telecommunications hardware vendors in the world just closed up shop and moved on. And this is Toshiba, a massive company. So we're seeing this happen all over the place where you've got one of two things going on. Either they're converting to hosted and they're no longer supporting their on-premise deployments, or they're just exiting the market completely and they're hanging their customers out to dry, which we've seen multiple times. The real problem that this is going to provide for people that do have on-premise systems is they're going to get super expensive to support, and they're also going to get extremely difficult to find support for. On the flip side, hosted systems, when it comes to support, the standard for hosted phone systems is support should always be included in an unlimited manner with your monthly cost. And you want to ask that question. We have seen instances where the hosted phone system provider is offering support with their contract, but it's email only, and you have to pay for phone support. Or it's email and phone only, but only during certain hours. Or it's email and phone only, or it's only configuration support. They won't actually support your phones or your handsets. The minutia within unlimited support is in my opinion too much. Like it should be, unlimited support should be unlimited, but it's not. So you want to ask, what exactly does unlimited support include? Can I call you at any time? Will you help me configure things? Will you help me fix phones? Where do you draw the line? Also, when it comes to a hosted phone system, because the support is included, you want to ask, are backups included? And are you doing them on a regular basis? And do I have access to them? That should be part of any support policy or any support structure. Also, are you releasing software updates, and how often are you releasing those? This is important because we've seen more feature adds to hosted phone systems in the last 2 years than probably the previous 10 combined. Just as the technology matures and becomes more mainstream, we're seeing all sorts of crazy stuff get crammed into phone systems. And even if it's not features to the phone system itself, you're seeing a lot more interoperability between software platforms, phone systems that can talk to Office 365, phone systems that can talk to Salesforce.com, things like that. So you want those software updates, and you want to make sure they're included on your contract on a regular basis, and some sort of guarantee that they are actually updating their product. We have seen providers that do not provide updates during a contract. You get what you get, and then at the end of your term, you can renew, and they'll update your software at that time. So you want to make sure that you're getting all the software, you're getting all the backups, that you're really truly hands off. What you're paying for is to not be responsible for a phone system. Next thing we want to talk about, and this is a big one for me, and I always like to think it is for everyone, but I'm not that naive. Security. Security is huge, and this is one of the biggest misnomers we're seeing in our industry. Not misnomers, but this is one of the biggest miscommunications or misunderstandings we're seeing in our industry right now, which is that hosted and cloud-based systems are less secure than on-premise. That is just not true. Almost universally, a hosted or a cloud-based system will be more secure than anything you can host on site. Now, obviously, I'm going to put a whole bunch of asterisks and caveats and everything else all around that because there are exceptions to everything. But the concept of a hosted system is typically one that's specific to a specific platform. So if you get a hosted phone system, you have a team of engineers that just work on phone systems. They just host phone systems. Their entire job is to secure phone systems. They're constantly watching, constantly monitoring, constantly on top of things with multiple data points from different customers that are all giving them input. If you're running your own phone system, and this applies to data systems too, but if you're running your own system, you're now responsible. You probably don't have dedicated resources. You probably don't have dedicated people on site watching things. You're probably not constantly training. So security in a work from home situation becomes much bigger. Because in an on-premise situation, sure, you have a classic phone system that is not open to the internet, and you're just bringing your phone lines in via old standard plain old telephone phone lines. That thing's pretty darn secure. It's going to be real hard to hack that machine. And even if you did, there's probably not a whole lot of damage you can do. But also, that type of deployment doesn't give you any work from home functionality. As you start adding work from home in remote offices, you have to open it up to the internet. You have to start allowing traffic into your phone system from outside of your network. As soon as you start doing that, you start allowing all sorts of traffic into your network, to your phone system. And that's where security becomes an issue. The worst hack I believe I've ever seen in my career, or at least maybe the most expensive, was a customer in Allentown that just not a big office, just 15 people, but they had their on-premise phone system that they were managing themselves, got hacked by some hacker in Kenya or someplace like that, and they racked up $23,000 in international calling before anybody caught it. And the customer was responsible for that bill. As far as the carrier was concerned, the phone system made the calls. And as far as the receiving parties were concerned, they received the calls. Everybody said it was legit. And they ended up paying $23,000 for calls they never made. So security is a huge factor when you start branching out into work from home, because you're opening yourself up to the internet more and more and more. And then the last point we have here, and obviously we always want to talk turkey in business, and that is costs. Not to get too deep into costs, but the landscape has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years that I would say half a decade ago, the biggest reason why we didn't see mass adoption of hosted phone systems, besides quality and the technology and everything else, was they were expensive. There was definitely a cost barrier there that really turned people off to a hosted phone system. We don't see that anymore. In fact, when we do our consulting now, almost universally, we're seeing either cost neutral or a cost savings going to a hosted system versus an on-premise system. Now, we do consider the cost of ownership of the system, the cost of licensing, the cost of hardware replacement, repair costs, system replacement, all of that comes into the formula we run, support, all of that. But over the span, the lifetime of a phone system versus the lifetime of having a hosted system, it is almost universally either cost neutral or cheaper to run a hosted system. So no more is the cost really a factor, at least in the sense that it should be detrimental. It shouldn't hurt you for making a decision one way or the other. Bottom line, if you don't have an on-premise system now, don't go to one. Hosted phones are clearly the winner moving forward. If you do have an on-premise system right now, you really want to make sure that you're going through this list of things we just discussed and weighing your pros and cons. On-premise phone systems can be very cheap to run. There are costs associated, and eventually they always come out. But you can run an on-premise phone system flawlessly for years with minimal cost. So there is definitely value there if you're in a good position, you have your security bases covered, and you've got some sort of maintenance going on. I will say we just recently in the last week had a customer was running their own on-premise phone system, and it completely crashed, and they had nothing. And they had to rebuild it themselves from the ground up. It was very difficult to watch, but they were able to because they do manage their own system. So there are benefits there, but if you're looking to change, go hosted. That's the only way to go at this point. So let's go into our next section. What should I look for in a phone system? First and foremost, the questions you want to ask here should relate to, most importantly, mobility. That's the number one item. When I say mobility, smartphone applications. If whatever phone system you're looking at does not currently have an Android and iOS app, cross it off your list. Web browser tools. You should absolutely be able to interface with your phone system via your web browser, both obviously for management, but also for individual users to pull up a web page. These are standard features that every system should have. If it does not, then I would cross it off the list. When I say web browser tools, I don't just mean the ability to make calls from your desktop computer, which you should be able to do, but also to check in and check out. In a work from home environment, you can't see Sally or Jim across the office to make sure they're at their desk. So being able to check into the phone system and see the status of your teammates is a huge feature to know who's available to take a call, who's available to jump on a conference, who's available to assist you with an issue. Additionally, any system that you look at, even if you don't use them now, should always have queues. I know a lot of times people think of queues and they think of big call centers, putting people in a queue to wait to be answered. But that's not necessarily from a telecom standpoint what queues are really for. Mostly queues are used to group calls together into groups so that we can have an accounting queue for people that are all working together in accounting and can take calls, or we have a sales queue where people can take sales calls and we put people into groups. Using queues allows people to check in and check out to different groups and be modular within the team. And in a digital system, you can see that visually, so you can reallocate resources on the fly within your phone system based on who's checked into what queues and who's available. The next item is configuration features. Obviously, we talked about call queues, but within those configuration features, you need to make sure that you have control over your configuration. Any good support contract you're going to sign, whether it's on-premise or hosted, should include configuration support. They should go in and make configuration changes for you as part of your support contract. But I would never count on that. You always want to make sure you have your own access to the primary configuration as well. We've had customers that have told us we'll never use the configuration, and 2 months later, they're in there constantly making changes. And we've had customers that have told us that we'll be in there making changes every 5 minutes, I swear. And then 2 months later, they call us for everything. You never quite know where you're going to land on a new platform until you get into it, but having the option to do this is huge. You also want access within your configuration portal to manage security. So a lot of very secure systems are going to have security management built into the management feature. The ability to whitelist and blacklist IP addresses to see the status of who's trying to hit the system and from where. This is huge from a work from home standpoint because you might have staff geographically dispersed that from an anti-hacking standpoint, it might look like somebody's trying to breach your system. You've got somebody trying to hit it from Michigan, somebody trying to hit it from Florida, somebody banging on it from an IP in Tennessee, and it looks like you're being attacked. But in reality, you just have a remote workforce. You just have people all over the country. We have encountered this issue before. We have a West Coast office, and when they try to log in, when they first connected to our phone system, we brought that office online, they were getting blacklisted because they were so geographically diverse from the rest of our phones. So the ability to go in and just whitelist them on the fly is a huge advantage to be able to manage your security within your system. And the last thing on the features is you want to make sure, well, not the last thing on the features, but the last thing in this section is you want to make sure that you have switchboard functionality. Most phone systems that are worth their salt are going to give you switchboarding as part of the system. Switchboarding, and what I mean when I say switchboarding, you should be able to see all the other extensions on your system. You should be able to see if they're on the phone, if they're available, if they're out to lunch. You should be able to drag and drop calls if you're an operator. You should be able to see inbound and outbound call histories. You should be able to see queues. You should be able to set up conference calls and things like that from within this management system. Any phone system that you move to should have this. If it does not, cross it off your list. That's going to be a big potential issue. Also, now wait, before I move past switchboarding, just to give you a heads up, some of the things we've seen, Comcast, for example, Comcast Business Voice, they have switchboarding, but you have to pay for it. In our minds, that's a major problem. The switchboarding should just be there for every user. But in their situation, if you want a switchboard, you have to buy each individual switchboard and pay a premium price per switchboard to have that. Usually we say when you're evaluating your systems, just make sure they've got switchboarding enabled as a standard feature for all users. Call recording. If it doesn't have the ability to do call recording, cross it off the list. Now, I'm not saying you're going to want to record all calls. We do in our office. We do it primarily for compliancy and for customer service purposes. But just the ability to do a call recording. If you're on a call and somebody's saying something, you're like, hey, I don't want to forget this. Maybe it's a technical call, or maybe you're on with your attorney or something, and you want to record the call, you should have the ability to do a hot record where you can just turn the recording on during the call and grab a copy of what's being said, or the ability to record all calls, or the ability to record groups of calls. For example, we have customers that just record their customer service team for security, but they don't record any other teams. Their accounting team's not recorded. Their marketing team's not recorded. The executives aren't recorded. But having the ability to do it is important just so that you have that flexibility. Now, beyond management features, there are a couple of other features that we want to call out specifically. One is digital faxing. Digital faxing is something that I reluctantly discuss personally. I despise fax, but I do understand that certain industries have to have it. What we generally recommend, though, is if you have to have fax, do it digitally. From a work from home standpoint, the ability to send and receive faxes from your Outlook, as opposed to having to drive to a physical machine, is the only way to go. Eliminating that need for physical access to machinery is a huge part of developing a quality work from home environment. If you still have to have a machine, and we run into this from time to time, where we have offices, maybe like a real estate office or something like that, where a lot of different people share resources, and maybe a fax machine is one of those resources, and they're just leave it open for people to use and to send. What we usually recommend is do both. Have a digital fax for your off-site people to still be able to send and receive without having to drive into the office. And then maybe through whoever your primary carrier is, get a single phone line to plug into your fax machine, that if somebody wants to walk up to the machine and send it and you want to give them that ability, they still can. But always set them to be received on your digital so that you can get them in as emails and manage them. The next item, and we've had some internal debate on whether or not this should be a cross it off your list type item, but we included it because I think it should be, and that is integrated web conferencing. We're in the age of Zoom right now. Web conferencing and video conferencing has become a bit of a standard. I don't think it's a valid phone system solution without integrated conferencing. I just don't see that as a realistic option. So I would always make sure you're asking that question. Is it included? And it is included for free. This should not be a thing you have to pay for. Conferencing is pretty streamlined anymore. You should just be able to get it in your phone system. So that's that's it on basically the feature section of what you want to ask and what you want to look for. So let's jump into Microsoft Teams here real quick and try to wrap this thing up. Um, Now, Microsoft Teams is quickly becoming the premier collaboration hub for companies. Most of you on this call either are using Teams or know of Teams, have some experience with it, but without a doubt, Microsoft is positioning Teams as their central platform for all their other apps. And from a personal standpoint, I don't think I've ever worked with a piece of software that has so dramatically changed my day-to-day operations as Microsoft Teams. So it is the real deal, and they're committing tremendous resources to it. So what's the deal? What is Teams? So as this thing builds up and becomes the center of Microsoft Office 365, and just a reminder, I know I said this earlier, we're going to have a whole separate webinar series, or not series, a whole separate webinar in this series dedicated just Office 365 and Teams. But it's bringing a ton of functionality into Office 365. For example, mobility. It's already, we talked about this with phone systems, it's already got browser apps, it's already got desktop apps, it's already got mobile device apps, Android apps, iPhone apps. All of that is already in place and works fantastically. It's got video conferencing embedded. Now, whether or not you know this, Skype for Business was actually kind of ended and rolled into Teams. That's where all of the video conferencing came from, is they integrated Skype directly into Teams. So this is a previously existing mature video conferencing platform that has now been embedded into this new central hub of communication. It's got chatting that rivals Slack. It's got the video conferencing. It's got standard calling and collaboration. It's got scheduling that integrates directly with your Microsoft Outlook. And the calling and video calling works great. We use it all the time in our office and are pretty dependent on it. Now, all of that I just said is different from Teams as a phone system replacement. And here's where this gets weird. So I can right now make a phone call on Teams to anybody in my tenant. That's called an internal tenant call. So if I wanted to call if I were to call Tyler, or if I were to call Maurice, I can literally click a button and have them on Teams immediately. I can call them both at the same time, and it'll immediately call them both and get them both into the same Teams call. That's within a tenant. And a tenant is, our tenant would be laughingrock.com, basically our domain. So anybody at our company that's under that umbrella is going to be easily accessible through Teams. If you have multiple tenants, which does happen, maybe one parent company owns multiple children company, as long as they're all within the same tenant organization, they're all managed under the same account in Office 365, they can all Teams each other. And we all live in harmony and things are beautiful. But then there's outside calling. Now, this is where Microsoft still has not kind of gotten it all together. So outside calling, first, Teams won't do it natively. You do need to add a bunch of add-on licensing to your Office 365 in order to get it to work. You need to add calling plans, you need to add minute plans, domestic and international calling plans. You need to have a minimum of an E-Series license, which we can get into in more detail in future webinars. But there is a significant amount of add-ons for each account in your Office 365 environment in order to enable Teams as a calling platform. Cost-wise, it comes out to about the same as a hosted phone system to add all of this stuff to Microsoft. So it's not really a question of cost at this point, more a question of what works best. Now, the real question is Teams viable as a phone system replacement yet? I'm going to answer that with a hard maybe. It will be viable. And I have no doubt within the next year or two, Teams is going to completely change the landscape of how telecommunications happens as it relates to IT and digital communications. It's awesome. It's a great platform. And the calling features for customers that we have operating on it do work well. But it is not a mature product yet. Just to give you an example of some of the stuff we've seen, since the entire work from home situation has started in the last 45 days, We've had 0 outages on our hosted phone systems. Teams has experienced no less than 6. So there's still a decent amount of system outages within Teams, a decent amount of loss of service. Their pricing is still very confusing and definitely not structured in a long-term strategy kind of way. It's kind of all piecemeal add-on stuff that you have to know a ton of information to even get it set up properly. There's also not a lot of depth within Teams to do a lot of call routing flexibility. So you can set up auto attendance and things like that, but you can't go deep. So if you have a complicated phone system, you're going to run into roadblocks just because of the capability of Teams to do very deep configurations. Hardware is a huge issue in Teams. Now, I told you the apps work great, but their hardware compatibility list is tiny. I mean, in the world we live in, I don't know that anything is as small as the hardware compatibility list we see with Teams. I can almost guarantee there's no phones you have at any of your businesses that will be compatible just because it's such a small list of phones that it will work with. And even headsets are a problem. And I ran into this personally. I bought a nice new set of Bose earbuds, only to find out after I received them and turned them on and got them working that Teams isn't compatible and I can't use them for my Teams calls. So headset and phone compatibility is a major issue. There's only maybe half dozen phones even on the market that you can connect to Teams to have a physical phone connected to it. So a lot of these things are going to be fixed. I guarantee you Microsoft is going to expand its hardware compatibility list. I guarantee you they're going to increase their reliability so the outages aren't as frequent. And I guarantee they're going to add depth to their configuration options. But it's going to take time. We do have customers that are running exclusively off Teams. I would say the overall satisfaction pulse I'm getting from them is satisfied. None of them are ecstatic about it. They do run into weird problems, but also none of them are truly unhappy. But I think they lost a lot leaving a mature phone system and going to Teams, even though they also gained a lot. And I think, as Americans, we never like to have anything taken away. We always like to add. So that's one of the issues we run into. But for the most part, keep your eye on Teams. And if you can deploy it now, and we'll talk about this in the next webinar, but if you can deploy it now and start getting your team used to it, eventually moving over to a Teams calling plan will be a very viable option. That's it. We hit all of our major topics there. I think I kept it within the time frame. We do have some questions that I'm seeing here, and Tyler, I saw that they came through. Can you post them into the general chat? And let's see. Okay, so will Teams or a hosted phone system replace Zoom? So obviously someone out there knows I hate the Zoom question. Anytime you have a dedicated platform like Zoom, it's always going to have advantages over anything else. And we've seen this time and time again with like Apple iTalk or whatever, the iVideo chat or whatever. Anytime it's a dedicated platform that does a singular thing, it's going to be good at what it does and lack expandability. Zoom falls directly into that category. Zoom is awesome at being Zoom. Does Teams replace Zoom? No, not really. Teams is kind of a different thing. Teams is more built for internal collaboration and phone system replacement. Does a hosted phone system replace Zoom? The right one, yes. But I would say only up to scale. At a certain point, you probably still want to look at if you're using video conferencing extensively in your organization, you may still want to add Zoom on as an additional option just to fill in gaps. What I would say is one of the cool things about what Zoom has done and what Teams is doing is I told you that Teams is a central hub for apps for Microsoft. Zoom is one of those apps. So if you use Teams and Zoom together, you can actually run Zoom out of your Teams and not have to move into a separate application, which is one of the nice parts about having that centrally located Microsoft hub of apps that are all designed for business. So yes with a maybe or no with a but. It's kind of the answer to that one. Sorry, can't be more specific. What else we got, Tyler? Can I keep my current phones if I move to a hosted system? Depends, but usually it's probably about a 50-50. If you have an old system, almost universally not. If you have either an old voice over IP phone system with very old phones, even if we can make it work, we don't always recommend it. Um, or if you have an analog system, the answer is just going to be no. Even if we can make it work, we won't, because the problems you'll run into are not going to give you a good experience. That said, if you have relatively current phones that are voice over IP in nature, yeah, a lot of times you can just keep your phones and just switch over your back end system. And we've had that happen quite a few times over the years where customers just reformat their phones out into our phone system and bang, they light up their extension, they're good to go. So that would be a specific to your system question. And if anybody wants to ask that, by all means. What else, Tyler? Can use a fax machine with digital faxing? All right. So the technical answer on that is yes. The real answer on that is no. Can you do it? Yes, there is technically ways to do it. Does it work atrociously? Absolutely. It's a nightmare scenario. Rarely have we ever integrated a fax machine into digital faxing and had it work the way the customer wants it to work. Typically, you're going to be far better off if you need both to run both independently. What else you got, Tyler? Do I need to pay for extra extensions if I want my team and I to receive calls on our cell phones? Okay. All right, that's a great question. I guess it depends on who you go with. On our system, I can speak to our system. On our system, no. Everything is extension driven, so we don't care if you connect 10 devices to your extension. If you've got your cell phone connected to your extension and your tablet connected to your extension, your desk phone, your phone at your home office, your PC, your other PC, your significant other's PC, whatever, as long as they're connected to the same extension, it's not going to change the price whatsoever. And you can have them all ring at the same time, or you can have them hunt through the devices. You can configure it however you want to configure it. The only time where additional fees would come into play is if you start adding additional extensions. Then that may incur additional costs. And that might be something you want to put on your list of questions to ask potential vendors is, are you going to charge me for additional devices that are connected to my extension? And find out what they say. Do we have any other questions, Tyler? Nope, looks like that might. Oh wait, can hosted phone systems integrate into Office 365? Yeah. In fact, we're seeing a huge movement right now, and this has been kind of fun and frustrating at the same time in the industry. But we're seeing a huge integration movement, and I give a lot of this credit has to go to Salesforce.com. I feel like they really pioneered a lot of this integration, bringing multiple platforms together for a richer user experience. Microsoft has taken it to a new level in the last 2 years, where they're basically just saying, plug your stuff into our stuff. Let's all plug it together. So most phone systems on some level are going to integrate Office 365. Again, that would be a question I would ask your vendor is, do you have an integration piece? Also, you want to check any other softwares that you use. You want to check and see if it'll integrate with that. And probably an additional question is, do you have an open API so that other companies can tie into you? So for example, we have some customers that run vertical market softwares that allow you to do API integrations into your phone system so that if somebody were to call, the phone number will trigger the account pull up and pull up the customer's record right in front of you. So that is a huge type of thing that can only be achieved if you've got open API and communications between your phone system and your softwares. But realistically, the best bet is to work with what it comes with out of the box. So if it says it'll integrate with Office 365, great. That's going to be easy. You don't have to build something custom. Any other questions, Tyler, that were posted? That's all I have. All right. And I think that's all that I have as well. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate you guys showing up. Our next webinar is going to be on April 22nd at 2:30 p.m. And that one's going to be collaborating with Office 365. So hopefully you guys can attend, and hopefully you're getting a lot of value out of this, and we can help you kind of fill in some gaps in your IT and your telecom. So thanks again, and everyone have a fantastic and very safe day.